Okay, so welcome to the Node.js package maintenance team meeting for June 30th, 2024. Before we get going, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, if not, we can move on to the things that were tagged for the agenda.
Sorry, I was tabbed away and
Go
had to
ahead. Yep.
tab back over to my
Go
hand, I
ahead.
think. I just wanted to just do a little quick shout out, especially considering the history of this group. Uh, when we started this group, one of the big key initiatives was some important and under maintained libraries in the ecosystem. So we had done a bunch of early work with Express, and the group sort of did end up leaving that in a place a long time ago that wasn't necessarily super healthy. But on the upside, we've restarted some of that effort and we've been making really great progress. We've got a group now of, I think, 5 or 6 active technical committee members. We're revamping the triage group, which was spun out of this group, help sort of formulate the plan for that. So we're reviving that, and we are pushing for an Express v5 release soon. So I just wanted to call it out. If anybody is interested in that work and wants to help us, we greatly appreciate anybody who is able to come help us out, get that back on track. Michael, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm just noting that down. Yeah, it's a good time to note that if you want to get involved, it's a good time, right? Okay. Any other announcements before we move on? Okay, if not, we might as well start off with the ones that you added, Wes. The first one is feet, next steps for version management process.
Yeah, so I'll give a quick update here, and then I think we probably want to leave most of the time to just discuss some of the topics around the contention in there. So we noticed some, people just starting to discuss in the issues again, sort of short-term, medium-term things around this topic. So we wanted to make sure we weren't dropping the ball. We had a discussion in the OpenJS Slack, the package maintenance channel in there. And so this PR was just trying to wrap up what we in that thread, totally just the folks in that thread, not trying to speak for everybody, had discussed, and then have it be a broader discussion with the group and try to reach some consensus around that. So obviously, the first 3 points, I think everybody was like, yeah, those make sense and are in line with the goals that we had previously landed. The fourth point is still pretty contentious. And so I think probably it'd be good to spend a little bit of time on that. Unless folks want to talk about the first 3 points, to me, those ones seemed like everybody was pretty much undisputedly agreeing with.
Right, and that for some reason I thought we'd landed that somewhere. Uh, I guess we landed
We landed the
something.
first part.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So let me, that's a good point. Thank you, Yurtis. Let me go through really quick what we had landed before, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So in the package maintenance repo, in the docs repo, there is a new version management folder. The first thing we landed was the goals. So the goals doc states 3 goals. This was the outcome of mainly of the first discussion in the collaborator summit in London, and secondly, the follow-up discussion we had in this group. So define the correct Node.js runtime version and package manager version for projects, install Node.js and a package manager for local development environments, run the correct version of Node.js and of a package manager for each project. Those were our 3 stated goals. And then we landed a follow-up document, which was the first step of that, which was to revise the download page. So you'll see some of those changes. They've landed and all been live on the website for a little while now, focusing on installing via version managers and sort of the things that we all agreed are the best course there. So that was the first step, which is to get away from the old, docs, which really sort of leaned heavily on less ideal installation methods. This proposal is that we didn't finish all of our goals. So we need to take whatever the next steps are. And so this was trying to lay out what we could do for next steps there. And again, like I said, the first three seem to be pretty uncontested, and those are the ones that clearly line with like revising the download page, which we had already landed. It sounds like Antoine wasn't opposed to 3, which is, I think, one meaningful move here, which is to move the core pack docs into core pack. As we pointed out, we don't distribute NPM's docs, even though we bundle NPM. So it seems
Yep.
like a fairly non-controversial point to just say, let's commit to moving those docs into the core pack repo itself. But obviously then number 4 is the one that's been voted indirectly on, that has had 2 competing, 1 PR to make it on by default, 1 PR to make it to remove it completely, and blockers and approvals on both of those, including from TSC members. So obviously that's the contentious one. And I don't think we have quorum here to resolve the contention. I would love if we had Antoine specifically, I think as the person who was helping championing that, if Antoine was available, but I know it might be a little bit, no, I guess it's not too late in France, but either way, without that input, I'm a little concerned we might not be able to arrive at a consensus here today either. So anyway, I'll see
Yeah,
the
I
floor. I
think,
think is enough. Is that a good enough like historical update on where
yep.
we're?
Yeah,
where
thanks.
we-
It's been a little while, so
Cool.
that helps bring at least me up to date.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that if you have questions or specific things you wanna talk about there.
Yeah, I just would like to understand where the biggest pushback in both PRs, enabling by default and removing it completely. So maybe you could help us understand more or less, overall, where's that?
I think my internet was having a hiccup there. I just got the message my connection was unstable. So if somebody else wants to respond while I see if I
Yeah, I
can.
mean, my understanding, there's lots of detail in both PRs that I'm going to fail to summarize well, but the pushback against enabling it by default, one of the items, like one of the topics is that the package manager field becomes like impossible to remove at that point. We are then, like, as soon as it's enabled by default, the package manager field and its current design that was designed by a very small number of people without a lot of stakeholder feedback, will be permanently part of the module ecosystem forever. It may or may not be a good design. That's a separate discussion, but like it's not clear. It's very much not clear whether it's a good design or not because it wasn't designed widely. Some of the pushback against removing it, of course, is that there are people that are using the package manager field and use Core Pack and like it. I would venture to say that what they like is the capability of enforcing developers to use the specific package manager, and that they don't necessarily. Some of them may like Core Pack specifically, and then some of them may just like the capability, and it's unclear how that split plays out, and it's probably going to be pretty impossible to figure that out anyway. And like some of the pushback has been like, we don't want to remove Core Pack without a replacement. Some of the counter to that part has been, instead of Core Pack enable, you can type, npm install -g Core Pack or whatever, right? Like, so there's different ways you can enable it, and then but if it's enabled by default, then you no longer need to type Core Pack enable. Yeah, so there's like DX benefits and negative impact either way. It's just a question of what patterns do we want to cement moving forward. That's my personal take on it without getting into a lot of details.
And I hope my internet is not completely dying here, so I will just add a little tiny bit. There the goals explicitly state our goal of having people have reliable builds via the, we even removed reliable builds, but the goals are stating we want the feature set. Everybody pretty much agrees the feature set is great. Like nobody's the goal of developers starting up on a project they've never touched before and having the right tools available to them is a great goal. And we all agree that that's where we want to get. I think what we are discussing in this PR is a little bit more how we get there, how we evolve to it, and whether or not Node.js as a project is the right home for making that decision for all end users, because that is really what is happening when Node ships a thing, right? And I'm not a small core person, in case folks haven't heard me on any of these before, but I am very much a let's get the right tools in at the right time for people. Like I'm happy to have core get bigger if it is the right decision for our user base. So I'm not standing on a principle there. I'm saying I do think that core pack today does not solve the second half of the problem, which is it's maybe more than the second half. It's the second 80%, which is having all of the things you need to develop projects on top of Node.js. And the main one that was never solved there is node version management is also part of this problem. We have two a priori things we say you need to have set up to get going on any standard node project. One is node and the other is a package manager. And if we're going to solve if Node.js, the project Node.js, not everybody else, not the whole ecosystem, if Node.js is going to solve the problem, then it probably needs to solve both of those at once. And the unfortunate thing about the design of Corpac today is that it does not have a technical way to do what it is doing for Node.js. So I think there's a gap there, and we've been working to fill that gap with, other proposals, dev engines, and a few other things. I don't want to, pigeonhole too much on that, but that was one of the big things that I think we were circling around with all the little issues that got brought up, and I don't think all those are super valuable to get into. But the main question I wanted to answer, and it got brought up in this thread, is Node.js the right host for making those decisions? Like Antoine said, hey, I see two other options. Replace Corpac with something that does more that we want, or make Corpac the standard way to install package managers in Node. And well, unfortunately, the package manager authors do not agree on the standard way to install. And I don't think they have to. I think that's actually one of the valuable pieces of the ecosystem, is if you want to use tools that require Corpac or require, like NVM has a shell script that I run when I install it on a machine versus other tools that do different installation methods. That's fine. That's a healthy ecosystem. And so separating like what Node.js, like if there was a standard way that all the package managers agreed to ship themselves, then I think we would probably not be having this discussion today, and Node.js would have shipped that 4 years ago, right? But that was unfortunately not Corpac, as we've proven out in the last 4 years of discussions. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'll stop.
Yeah, and I think even in our earlier proposal, like the proposal thing that landed in terms of the revised download pages started out saying that I think we'd agreed in this group that the optimal way is to install Node.js and other Bootstrap components like the package managers through external tools. So I think what you're getting to is like, let's update the documentation to make sure we fully cover that. And then it would be that, okay, the proposal is to remove Corpac because we've kind of said those two things should be installed externally, and therefore, Corpac, which is doing it as part of Node, doesn't really fit that model.
I mean,
see Darcy Jordan has his hand up first.
Yeah, I think, and please, folks who were around at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I remember of the history here is that the Yarn maintainer made an effort to get Yarn to be bundled into Node alongside NPM. And PNPM may or may not have been included as a way to like indicate that it's, more inclusive, but like the PNPM maintainer wasn't particularly involved in this effort at all. The it seemed like the general atmosphere was to not bundle yarn, and that as what seemed from the outside like a reflex reaction, the yarn maintainer created Corpac as a way to find a compromise so that you can get yarn easily built into Node. In other words, the current broader goal of Corpac of like, making it easy for developers to use the right tools, that was not its original goal. It was not designed originally around that. And more importantly, it never had any time in user land to prove out that design and iterate on it. It was brought into Node almost immediately, and it's been iterated on with a privileged position that has not even worked out to a design that is broadly acceptable. So it seems prudent as well to give it the opportunity to iterate in user land with competition, which is a big part of the philosophy of the Pro Corpac folks, so that it can come up with the best design and iterate on it that way. And at some point in the future, if the broader community response is that this is indeed a good design and solves our problems, something we want, then obviously Node would want to vendor it in, but that has not been established.
Yeah,
I
I
see
think-
Yortis has his hand up.
Yeah. So I used to be impartial about the situation, to be honest, Jordan, because at the end of the day, it's experimental. But what I do not understand is that why, if enabling by default is a problem, and you already proved that, hey, there are things to be met, I see the conversation always goes into a political realm of NPM versus this and that and whatnot, and always get distracted. So from the foundation perspective, I would like to see those critical points that have to be addressed from Corpac to honestly make sure that we're fixing what needs to be fixed. Now, removing it, I have a major concern now because I've been more than 4 years that we just put this in the back burners, I think. And there's so many, at the very least for me, at least 3 or 4 companies that I know CI, developers and everything is just rely on these tools to be set up on top of Corpac. And I understand that you did the survey, but still concerns me that, what is the scale of the impact of removing that? And I think it's tricky. And lastly, it's proven, and I cannot disagree, that NPM was critical for Node.js to succeed. That's no question about it. I would never disagree on that. But also, has been proven as well that the competition has brought up like amazing features and created a much better ecosystem. And at this point, a package manager to install package manager do not sound that crazy because we're just mirroring how the organizational structure and whatnot in the code as usual as any other company. And what I do not appreciate at this point is that there is one company pushing way too hard back just because we don't want to change. And the foundation have to make a decision, I believe, when it comes to how you're going to be interacting with NPM. Because it's not fair that competitions are actually fixing problems. They were not created just for the sake of. They actually were created for actually solve problems that NPM didn't solve. And now what? So those are my thoughts in general. But primarily, I'm really concerned removing it because there are plenty of CI and developers and whatnot companies affected by this. This is not as simple as 2,000 people voting, in my opinion.
Darcy has his hand up next.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple points I want to speak to. One in terms of like pulling out a tool like this. To Jordan's point, like it did exist prior to being included with Node, and it is a separate tool. It didn't have a ton of time in the ecosystem to be baked before it was pulled in, but it did exist and does exist separate of Node Core. So you can still access it, and in fact, you can get the latest version of it independent of the Node distribution. So like pulling it out of Core, I don't think prevents anybody from continuing to use Corpac, right? And just continuing, I saw the head nod, Jordan, but you can continue to use it. And I think what we have to consider is what was the historical precedent. that we were not willing to change. So it was already voted on that Node didn't want to remove npm from Node, from the Node distribution. And historically, how you got your packages, how you have consumed and locked in your packages has been through the view of npm. And that was the default way that we sort of privileged consuming packages because we had to make a choice in terms of how to consume from the ecosystem. And that was the choice. That was the tool we were using. It would be different if like somebody had come to npm and said, let's add some new capabilities to npm. And I've seen some comments like, this seems like it's us removing like rust up, like if rust removed rust up. And actually, I would say if we were to remove npm, it would be like removing rust up. But removing core pack is sort of, it seems very ancillary. Like npm could have the same capabilities of core pack, I think, and resolve a lot of these problems maybe. And I would say that the reason why I think npm doesn't support some of the current capabilities of core pack is because I think the design is a bit, it's a bit concerning how it's actually implemented. Like the devil is definitely in the details, and the way that this was architected, I think makes a lot of people assume it's doing something similar to what npm historically has. And actually the code is creating net new sort of conceptual ideas about what a package is versus what a package manager is. And I've given this feedback before that like that change of definition, it's not really apparent to end users that they are actually now using a tool that is changing the underlying nature and sort of precedent that was set historically. I think it's concerning because there's a lot of bugs that come out of this, and they aren't immediately, like it's not immediately apparent that Yarn is not the Yarn package you've used to consume. And I think that's a bit concerning, I think, for some folks. And just the fact that this new tool doesn't interrupt well with a tool that we've been shipping for 10 plus years, that's another concern. And the reason that like we're shipping this independent of even the node core binary has me questioning why don't we, if we care about these capabilities and we think it's worthwhile, why don't we add it to the node binary, right? So I think it was sort of tacked on, it has been developed independently, and I think that there's reasons to think that people can still use this outside of core if we removed it, and they actually won't be disrupted significantly at all.
Wes had his hand up next.
Yeah, fair bit has been said, so I'm debating on what to reply to here. I would say, first and foremost, I want to address, I think, some of the artists that you brought up, which is that oftentimes the discussions around this have strayed into, I think, political, but I even hesitate to use that word. I think, maybe even just saying non-technical feedback is maybe a better way to to put it. But to be political about saying political, I guess, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, my point with that is that the reason these working groups exist is to help foster an environment of collaboration. When CorePack was introduced, there was no group formed around it to help guide it toward a path into Node Core. That is just not what happened historically, right? So because of that lack, it meant that the consensus was escalated directly to the group whose nearly sole purpose here is to resolve technical issues that reach a point where the politics cannot get over itself and then have a vote, right? So what happened was it went straight to the voting body when it skipped the consensus step, right? So while I totally understand that sentiment, our hands are tied here. It devolves to that because it was forced into that from the very beginning. So what I've been hoping to do with fostering the discussion at the Collab Summit and trying to have some of these discussions in this group is to bring it back down to a non-political level. Let's find the actual edges of these technical problems and let's see if we can solve them. And maybe, I really hope we can, maybe we can. Unfortunately, though, again, we don't have the core pack maintainers in the room. So that has been a regular lack of, that's been the lack the entire time, is the folks who can help us get over those things are not implementing the feedback and are not participating in the feedback cycle. So it has become very difficult to have a productive conversation and move forward without it resorting to a little bit of those, fallbacks of like, let's make it, let's call for a vote or let's do this or that, that are, again, non focused on the non technical aspects of it. So my hope would be that we can get over that. So now that was my long rant on like why we're at that. If we can get over that, which I really hope we can, I really hope everybody here agrees. We are, that is one major goal out of this effort. If we can, then I think there are a bunch of really tractable technical problems to solve. Now, core pack absolutely could be the thing that solves those. I'm happy to see that happen, right? I would love to see core pack drop the thing that Mateo decided to change his opinion on. If the core pack maintainers want to listen to that feedback and change the tool, then that would resolve one of the big complaints about core pack. Additionally, if core pack wanted to work with folks like FNM and NVM and the other node version managers to find a way to be a tool that could ship opinions on both node versions and package manager versions, or again, I keep on going back to this, or any development environment requirement, right? Like one of the biggest issues that I've seen at work over the past few years is simply upgrading Node and having Python go from 2 to 3. I know it sounds silly, but like these are the real things that happen in real projects across the industry, and core pack won't solve for those, but it could, right? Because dev engines, we've figured out a way to make dev engines probably describe the metadata so that a project could say, hey, this project doesn't work with versions that are reliant on old node JIP and thus Python 2, right? But like core pack didn't take on that scope because it wasn't brought up in a group who could give that feedback and say, hey, there's more than just package manager necessary here. We need, there's certain packages that only can be developed on Nix-based systems and don't run on Windows. But we don't have a way to describe that in the package, right? So what we hope to do is get all of those pieces in line. So dev engines is one aspect. I would love to see core pack implement dev engines or some variety of it. Again, I don't think dev engines is the holy, grail solution here anyway, but it's a solution we've gotten quite a bit of consensus on and eyes on that would solve some part of the problem. If core pack wants to do that, I think that would be an awesome next step to helping us feel more comfortable with core pack being part of that story. And it's more than just that. I think there's a bunch of other ones. That was just the easiest one for us to try to tackle first. But I think there's a bunch of other things around like package aliasing. I think, as Darcy pointed out, the Yarn installation from core pack is actually coming from the Yarn website. And that was Mateo's concern, is like, well, we've got this way that people deal with this, and there's no good configuration way to make sure that core pack is getting Yarn from an internal registry, for example, right? Like there's just no easy configuration. People are finding that that's, tripping them up. So there's a bunch of little things like that. And if the core pack maintainers come to the table and work through those technical problems, then I think a lot of this stuff goes a lot easier going forward. but it requires that collaboration point. And today we're resorting to things that sort of end around that because we've been unable to get the folks deeply invested in maintaining Corpac to be a seat at the table. I think I'll rest there.
Jordan,
Yeah, so I have a few things to respond to. So for Wes, I think all of us want to have a zero politics, zero interpersonal, and like just technical discussions on engineering things. But like politics really do matter because we're all humans, and in often a well can become poisoned. And in this case, like while I would love to see that change, I don't think Yarn and Corpax maintainers have showed up to npm RFC calls, package maintenance calls, like anything outside of a GitHub thread or Twitter to collaborate in the better part of a decade. So it's, oh, Antoine has, that's great to hear. But like, I want these people in here to collaborate. I want us to share our ideas, and it's pretty difficult to iterate on something when the people running it are underrepresented in these standards arenas. And then to Darcy's point, when npm ships dev engines, which maybe Leo can speak to, I think most of what Corpac can do will be in Node by default. And so that's good. And I also hope Corpac could implement dev engines, whether it's bundled in Node or not. And then to Yortis, like you mentioned fairness a couple times, and that's come up in a lot of discussions. Node's job is not to be fair at all, not in any way. Its job is to pick winners and make things better for its users. Otherwise, it wouldn't have added a test runner. It wouldn't have added basically an implementation of anything that's not standard, right? Like, so fairness is irrelevant. It's what is the best thing for users. And currently Corpac is not that. And it could become that, or it could be removed and replaced by something that could become that. And I think that's what we should be focusing on as a project, and not talking about fairness at all. Because Node shouldn't be making it easier for people to use Deno or Bun either, right? Like, that's not Node's job, unless that would be better for users, in which case Node would hang up its hat. So, yeah.
I misspoke there. Definitely, I'm agree with you. No fairness, but address the actual problems that npm as well has, right? Like, that's all I care. We need to address the actual issue. They weren't created just because. Yeah.
But sometimes also people are often trying to say, well, we shouldn't remove X without a replacement, Corpac in this case, right? But sometimes having nothing is actually the best motivator for designing the correct thing. And I think that applies here.
I think my hand's up next. I think like what I took from our past discussions was that it's not about like it. I think where we've gotten to is like the best implementation is going to be where Node isn't tied to the particular package manager or bundles all the package managers. And it's kind of, so it's not about whether something fixes some problems or things like that. It's like, at least in my opinion, it'd be better if Node was installed along with the package manager, as opposed to the package manager coming with Node, or Node later installing package manager. And so like, if you look at that approach, then it's about like, how do we move towards that? And that's not by including more in Node. That's by like trying to that was part of the instructions on the web to say like, well, how would you move towards that manually today? And then as a next step, hopefully people say, well, yeah, if that's the direction we're going, here's a tool which installs both of those things for you and makes it really easy. And that solves a bunch of problems that we've gotten because things were tied together. If you want to have multiple package managers, you can then choose which one gets installed. Node doesn't have to make that choice for you, and it makes a lot of things easier. So I think, for me, if looking at this particular list of things, like if 4 is going to be super contentious, I might even suggest that we just like agree that we're not going to make Corpac stable. So it's going to stay experimental. And at some point, it may get removed because like you actually use it from outside of Node versus inside Node itself. I see Wes has his hand up next.
Yeah, I'm very glad you said what you just did there, because I was hoping we could maybe move to like what could next steps be. And I absolutely think that an acceptable next step would be to change that number 4 to say that we're just recommending we keep the status quo for now, which would be not landing either of those PRs, right? Either of either the remove or the on by default. And we continue with this group to refine and work toward what those goals are. Because I think those goals are the same, and they're the guiding principle behind Core Pack. They're also the guiding principle behind like making the changes to the website. So to me, I think that's an acceptable next step. What I don't want to see, which is unfortunately going to be difficult, I think, here, is to continue to have a bunch of swirl around the topic. So one of the reasons this came up again was the comments started again in the couple of PRs with people flip-flopping either their approval or just raising, hey, what's going on here kind of questions. And unfortunately, saying we're keeping the status quo does not help move those conversations at all, right? It keeps them very much in limbo. And so I would recommend that if we are going to make that make that change to this PR, then I think the next step really needs to be a deep dive that has the Core Pack maintainers involved. And I think the TSC needs to mandate this because, again, we're talking, I mean, and maybe not, that's maybe going too far. The whole goal is to remove the necessity for the TSC taking a stance like that. But one way or the other, this is part of the node project and the TSC is the governing body. They said they're going to delegate that to the decisions in this area to this group. And we still do not, unfortunately, have quorum with the maintainers there. So if we're going to backpedal on this proposal, then I think we have to push in another way. And if that and that needs to be to get them in the room and for us to have like a deep technical discussion about like what it would take to get consensus.
Yeah, and I think
So,
you
like,
might be softening a little bit more
drive
than
to
I was outlining. Like I was almost just hunting on when it would be removed, but not necessarily that the recommendation be that like we keep it as experimental and like the long-term, the long-term view is that it will be removed because the goal is to get to the point where you install these things separately. And then, maybe we're not there yet. So like there's more stuff for documentation. Maybe we want to see some more tooling. So we won't say, it has to go away, but it's like, it's going to stay experimental. And the long-term path is that it's going to go away. Right. And like, because then you might not have the, well, what do you do instead argument, because we're sort of deferring that until like that better fleshed out. So I don't know if that addresses your concern of like, the swirl part, like, it would be maybe a little bit more definitive than just like we're deciding later, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a tough spot. I'll just say that. So yeah, I agree. It is not. I'm a fan of taking action, and this is explicitly saying. Even the way you said it there is explicitly saying we're not taking action. So I'm hesitant to say I like it, but I will definitely disagree and commit if that's what we think we can land for now, just to keep things moving forward together.
I think either way it goes back to like we don't necessarily have all the right people in the room to agree one way or the other. So it's
I
But
think
oh, go ahead, yours.
Roger. Yeah. So from my perspective, never discourage experimentation. So I think leaving it there, an experiment is a good idea. Enable it by default, even though before I was one of them, is like, could you please do it? Because I discovered that was no by default. But now understanding that your perspective is, once that key is there, has to be official for Node.js, I'm on board with you. Don't do it then, right? At the same time, in some TC39, I think it was a pipes operator. this type of situation where somebody opened a thread and on opinions, and then it was impossible to understand where the action items were, the problems that were not. It was common. So what I suggested there, I believe, or somebody else, was have one log thread where the person responsible would give updates in terms of where this at, but it was log. At the same time, there was another thread where people could bike shed on it, and literally was called bike shedding. So if you really want to dump your feelings, political, non-political, doesn't matter. Let the people be people. But at the very least, there was a clear threads for people like me, for example, to go and say, where is this at? What's the status of it? What is being thought out? The summary and whatnot. I think that will help here, because I don't appreciate, neither the threads going into long thing that I cannot read anymore, and I don't understand where Node.js itself is at with the situation. And yeah, that's that. And one more
Sorry.
thing, definitely
Okay, yeah, okay,
point
go ahead.
the ownership. Like now that I understand a little bit more, I'm with you guys. Like, we need to bring the ownership and put in Corpac and say, look, we're giving you the space of experiment, but we also making you hold accountable for making sure that you address the problems. Those two combines probably would produce something that we will be happy in the future.
Yeah, I just wanted to add I think that there is value even to Wes and what Wes and Michael were talking about. Even if we recommend not doing anything right now, but we set a future direction, I think there is value in that, because it sort of makes it clear. If we say, if Node as a project is able to say Corpac is going away, it's gonna be removed. We're not removing it yet, so we don't break people, so we don't like cause you pain without giving you an easy, or a supported replacement. But like, it's going to be removed. Expect that, and then we work to provide the replacements, whatever those are. And that replacement could be a better Corpac, but like the signal is still clear that way, that don't rely on this exact implementation. And then at some point in the future, we have something to recommend, whether that's Corpac that's improved, if the maintainers want to participate in our, and collaborate, or whether that's some combination of other things, like fine. But at that point, Corpac would be actually removed, and we'd in favor of the replacement we'd recommend. And probably it would be separated a bit. We'd recommend a replacement, we'd wait some chunk of time, and then, we would remove it. Something to that effect. And to be clear, Ruben, I'm not talking about deprecation warnings. I'm just talking about like speaking, like pros announcements, right? Like just saying on GitHub, the Node project is going to be removing Corpac once a replacement is prepared. That is still valuable without any runtime effect whatsoever.
I see there's a few more hands up. Was there anything else on the agenda that people felt we needed to get to? Because it is a good point. We're down to 15 minutes or so forth. So
This is
like
the only
either,
one
so if
that
there is something, maybe we'll make sure we reserve some time. Otherwise, we can continue on this one. Okay, I don't hear anybody like, hey, there's another one we need to get to, so I guess we might as well continue on this. I see Yortis has his hand up next.
Okay,
Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead. Was missed.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I think you just love the idea. I think we should definitely take that action of having a thread with a clear intent and updates. I do think that would be what this PR was intended to do. So if we are all right with that, I wouldn't. Yeah, so locked thread. I mean, a PR where only committers can change it and change it through a PR is, I would say, equally good to a locked thread, in my opinion. But I'd love to hear you disagree, and so that's fine. And then and then the idea would be we move the discussion from the two open PRs that notify all the people who follow Node. So I don't know if we need to lock those. We maybe need to recommend locking those ones. And we move all the discussion into a package maintenance working group thread where it's all of these other concerns. And that would, I think, clean things up a bit. It would centralize, and then we could link in those other issues to the bike shedding issue and the update docs PRs. I think that would be an excellent way to sort of clean up and get people sort of all pushing in the right direction, which is important here. Because I think, yeah, as we all know with this, part of the reason why it's been so problematic is every single one of these turns into 5,000 comments and mini paragraphs in each of them, which is impossible to keep up with. Trust me, I had to do it all to run that session in London, and it took me almost an entire week to read everything once, which is just wildly absurd. So so I agree with that, and I can definitely take some next steps on that portion of it. But I think that it sounds like we need to actually separate the fourth issue into maybe 2 or 3 different points. But I don't want to waste the entire time talking about those. I'd rather hear from Ruben. So I don't know if are people all right with me taking an action item away from this that's like refactor point 4 to be what we talked about on the call? Okay,
That
sounds
sounds
like
good.
that we have agreement there. Okay, Ruben, it's all you.
Well, I can pretty much repeat what I already wrote in the chat, that it's like the main tricky part, 2 aspects. First of all, how many people are we going to break by removing even something experimental? Like we would have to really strongly let users notify users that this is going to go away. Otherwise, the experience, actually, Wes, you're maintaining Express, right? I mean, how many years has Express not been strongly maintained? There might be different opinions about that, but I would say it has not really been maintained, or no real big releases have been there, and it was just growing in their user base nevertheless. So there were alternatives, other things were recommended, but everything always grew, and things like that also happen to experimental features when it's not like very, very, very obvious, and that you shouldn't use those anymore. And from a user perspective, I would like to come back to the original idea or intent why Corpac was implemented in the first place, and that is making users' lives easier, because they asked for a way to really have that however it is implemented. I actually don't care about that, to be honest, but they wanted to have one way to just use their package manager that they care about from the very beginning on. And that's something we should concentrate upon, out of my perspective, way more than on Corpac. Like Corpac was a means to the goal, and that's what I would like to concentrate on.
I'll add that that's, I think,
fully-
exactly aligned with what I was kind of trying to say, that like if we believe that the way to make lives easier is to have the 2 things managed outside of Node, let's focus our energy on building up that story. But I'll add, with your point about breaking people, I think we can. That's where I was sort of going, like, if we can say that the direction is something else, but we're not going to break people today until we get some more, push that down the path until there is something that hopefully people get pulled into. Maybe that's the balance between the 2. See, Wes, your hands up.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what our intent was with the goals document as well.
Yeah.
Was to say our goal here is nothing. It is not a specific, Corpac resolution. It is actually serving the users in the way that we want to, and serving all the users in a way that is consensus driven and agreeable. And so I fully support that. I think the unfortunate reality is that this conversation has been framed around to enable or to remove Corpac. And that is because it was done via PRs to Node Core, which was pretty unwise to push the conversation forward, and also unwise to build any consensus, because it's battle PRs, right? Battle PRs is not a consensus building technique, right? And so I think to move past that, again, we really need to have some structured conversations. And so I think, would you agree if we made a recommendation that was, we are going to, plan to remove core pack once these things are met, and these things would be, a way to use core pack, a well-documented way to use core pack to get your, package manager. Additionally, a well-documented way for other tool, like I'm just spitballing here, I'm brainstorming, so I'm just trying to get to something where, Ruben, your concern is addressed by the document that we are trying to land as the next steps proposal. Like, is there something that we could change that would get you like to be giving it all the thumbs up, despite the fact that the end goal here so far is looking like, breaking some people?
I believe it would take time for the ecosystem pretty much to pick up on a new solution and to really have used that for a while. And when we talk about a while in the Node.js ecosystem, we're talking about really a long time. Like I would not say a timeline below 3 years or something like that. Mm. And then we could probably, when also deprecating it and like pushing warnings out when it's used, etc., to maybe remove that. But maybe we also just have like a pretty much like a historical part in there that we support one way or the other, but we don't document it anywhere anymore. Like we do have other parts in Node where we do exactly that for more than just 3 years, but I'm talking more like 10 years.
I mean, if that's what it takes, that's fine. But that bar was nowhere near what like put on core pack to be put in the first place, and like that's worth considering.
Right. I think for me, Wes, documentation could help in this particular case. I think it's too risky because we have our TFM for reason inducer, right? And I'm not gonna go against that. Although that's not your responsibility, I think, like from the professional side of thing, it became your responsibility once you decide to put Corpa in it, which is more or less what Jordan is saying. So following the original situation, I think putting at some point, the conversation became of like, it have to be enabled by default, yes or yes, because it's not fair, yada, yada. I was following the other way back, right? I think not that many people understand the stand for Node.js, right, of why package manager is not enabled by default. I don't think that's clear because that wasn't clear for me and I was following this for a long time. Most of the people that defend PNPM, Yarn, and stuff like that, they do not understand that part. So they're seeing it from the political side. But if you go to them and say, hey, they're reasonable people, by the way, they just want things to be held accountable, like me in these conversations, you can tell. So if you go and document precisely, we're not going to put this in the package manager because it's not official. It's an experimental. That's what it means to be experimental. And there are a few subtle things that Corpac needs to fix for us to NPM Node.js feel that we could actually move from experimental to adopted. And they had to do that. I think most people from Yarn and PNPM wouldn't mind. But that conversation, that clear communication directly to the point haven't exist. And at that point, let Corpac to be there just fine as it was until now. And we don't have to force the situation to be binary in this particular case. Because the original problem, from my perspective, and my understanding being part of this for a long time, is that there was no clear communication from Node.js about package manager field and why it was not enabled by default and so on. But most people are reasonable from Yarn and PNPM, aside from the 20% that goes too political. But, that's something else.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very much in line with the goals I've been trying to pursue, picking this stuff back up again. So I think we can do that. I am a little concerned. I will share, I'll be very vulnerable here, that the history here has not proven out that the work to put together those pieces of feedback will be taken. And so that, I think, has made it more difficult to achieve, but I am an eternal optimist. So I will continue to try to beat the drum of that. And hopefully that is something we can get into these doc proposals. Because I think that's the real end state here, is we land a plan that actually gets some consensus. So if we lay out the technical concerns and Corpec addresses them, I don't think anybody here was ever opposed to that being the end state. It just actually has to happen, and it unfortunately is not. It's not happening.
Although
It's not happening,
I think I think I think having looked at the big picture, that would still not be I mean, I wouldn't necessarily object formally, but I think, again, putting our energy into what we think is the right answer, which I think is something external, managing both Node and whatever other Bootstrap components like package managers, is actually the better way for the project and for end users. So getting something which doesn't fit in with that, even if you solved every one of the little, the individual problems that people have raised, doesn't move us in that direction. So I think long run we'd be better off with the energy being put into getting something in line with that, the separation versus okay, we got something else bundled in, right? Because anyway, I don't want to reopen the whole discussion, but that's kind of my perspective. Is I don't think it's as simple as just saying hey, here are the 5 things that have to happen. We are at time. I have to drop off, but I can make somebody else the owner if people want to continue.
I have to drop off also. Going back to TC39. See you all next time.
Anybody want
I'll
to become the chair or? Okay.
I can't, but I will just make sure I reiterate. I'm taking away some points here. I'm going to make some changes to that PR. I would love y'all to get in there and help us find this so that we can actually get something that has a chance of landing.
Sounds good. Okay, well, I think then we'll call the meeting for today. Thanks for everybody. It's a good discussion, and we'll see you in GitHub the next time. Thanks. Bye.